The blood on the snow should have been the first warning. Michael Grant had seen his share of storms, but nothing like the one that night, the kind that swallowed sound and memory alike. When he opened the cabin door, the wind nearly tore it from his hand, and through the white chaos, he saw it, a motionless shape buried beneath the snow, a faint sound barely louder than a heartbeat. What he rescued that night wasn't just a wounded K9, it was a forgotten piece of his own soul. And before the dawn came, man and dog would find each other again, bound by loss and the fragile light of redemption. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. Snow presses against the valley, blue and breathless. The wind tastes like iron. The town holds its lights close. Michael Grant drives the ridge road at a crawl, wipers ticking a tired metronome. 45, broad-shouldered but thinned by sleepless years, beard trimmed close against the cold. The navy parka sits heavy on his frame. A black turtleneck warms the scar that climbs from jaw to ear. His voice, when he checks in on the radio, is low and steady, a habit from blast sites and door breaches. He has been moved out here to Silver Creek to heal, they said. File work, perimeter patrol, space to let the mind settle. But the mind does not settle. It circles. In the mirror he avoids, a stranger watches back, a man who counted the breaths of friends and came up short. Tonight the storm makes a room around him. The dashboard glows a small, stubborn fire. He thinks of the smell of cordite, the sudden quiet after alarms, the way guilt finds a chair and will not rise. He hears it between gusts, a thin, breaking sound, not wind, a dog's voice, weak as thread. He parks on the crown of the road and steps into the white. Snow climbs his shins. The pines lean and whisper. His breath hangs, then tears away. He works the beam of his flashlight across drift and ditch until it catches on a dark shape. A German shepherd lies half-buried near a fence line, ribs lifting in shallow effort, ice clotted at the whiskers. Male, maybe 4 years, black and tan coat dulled with frost. A scrap of training cord knots at the neck, K9 issue, Denver style. Michael kneels, the dog's eyes open, amber, steady, without panic. He speaks softly, the voice he used on explosives and frightened children. Easy, partner. The dog does not flinch. When Michael lifts him, the weight is heat and trembling. He presses the body to his chest and lets the storm take the words he cannot say. At the substation, the world reduces to stove heat, lamplight, and the stubborn rhythm of survival. Wood snaps. Wet fur fills the room with the smell of wild rain. Michael towels the dog dry, checks paws for cuts, finds a shallow graze along the shoulder. He warms water, stirs in broth, waits for the tongue to move. It does. The dog swallows, slow and deliberate. Michael notes the posture, alert even in pain, trained to watch the door, to read the room. He murmurs a name that arrives before thought, carrying both weight and mercy. Ranger. The ears lift. Those amber eyes settle on him as if measuring a distance long traveled. Michael sits back on the bench, hand still resting on the rising ribs, and lets the stove breathe for both of them. Snow ticks the window. In the quiet, the old blast returns, then thins, then slips a step farther away. He does not promise more than he can hold. Only this. You're safe. I'm here. The words feel true enough to keep. Morning breaks gray over Silver Creek. The air smells of iron and smoke. Inside the small cabin, the wood stove ticks like a tired heart. Michael wakes before dawn, his shirt clinging to sweat. The dream had come again, the roar, the flash, the faces. He remembers the way Daniel shouted something he never heard, the heat lifting him from the ground. In the dream, he always reaches for the dog in the firelight, always too late. He sits up, breath loud in the still room, heart thudding against the memory. The scar along his jaw feels hot, as if the blast has followed him here. Then a quiet sound, a paw, light against his arm. Ranger is there, eyes open, amber and calm. The dog's chest rises slow, waiting. Michael stares back, caught between years. His hand trembles once, then steadies on warm fur. Later, he walks through the cabin, small and spare, one bed, one desk, a shelf lined with reports he never reads. The kettle hums, the fire sighs. Ranger watches from the corner, still weak but alert, head tilted in the soft light. Outside, snow drifts past the window, muffling the world. Michael pours coffee, but the smell turns his stomach. The sound of the explosion is still in his ears, faint but real. He looks at Ranger again, at the tan lines around the muzzle, the scar along the shoulder, the discipline in every breath. It is the same posture, the same gaze he remembered from the training yard. Daniel's dog. He knows it before he admits it. That afternoon, the wind dies. Michael takes Ranger outside for the first time since the storm. The yard is a field of white, the air sharp enough to sting. Ranger limps beside him, slow but steady, nose low to the snow. Every few steps he stops, as if listening to something beneath the silence. Michael kneels to adjust the bandage, and the dog leans into his touch. The gesture feels too knowing to be chance. He whispers Daniel's name without meaning to, and Ranger's ears flick once, then still. The moment is brief, but it settles deep. He realizes what this means. If the dog survived, then he had left something behind that mattered. Maybe the world was not finished with him after all. Night returns early. The stove burns low, the light soft as breath. Michael writes a few words in his notebook. Alive. Same eyes. He doesn't know if he means Ranger or himself. Outside, the storm has moved east, leaving the valley clear and cold. He listens to the sound of the dog's breathing, the steady rhythm of trust rebuilt from ruin. Tomorrow, he will drive to town, ask the vet to confirm what his heart already knows. For now, he lets the quiet hold him. In the space between sleep and memory, guilt loosens its grip a little. There is warmth enough to last the night. Snow had fallen again, softer this time, like ash settling after a fire. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Michael walked the ridge with Ranger pacing close beside him, the leash loose, unnecessary. The trees stretched tall and bare, their bark dark with melt. He had begun to trust the quiet again until Ranger stopped. The dog's ears pricked forward, body low, breath still. Michael followed his gaze to a mound of snow near the ravine. Beneath it, something metallic caught the pale light. They dug together, gloved hands and strong paws, until the earth gave up its secret. A crate, stenciled with faded letters, Denver PD Tactical Supply. Michael brushed the frost from the edge. The seal was unbroken, the hinges new. His stomach turned. He knew those codes. They belonged to the same shipment that had disappeared the week before the explosion. He took a photo, then called it in. The line cracked with static before Davis answered. The man's voice was calm, measured, every word controlled. "Seal it up. I'll handle it. Don't speak to anyone about this. Not yet." Davis, 50, still carried himself like a soldier. Short gray hair, hard jaw, the kind of authority that made men follow before they thought. Michael had once respected that. Now he only heard the precision of someone managing a story. When the call ended, the wind rose, carrying the scent of metal and pine. Ranger stood staring at the open crate, growling low, a sound that came from memory rather than instinct. Michael knelt, pressed a hand to the thick fur. "Easy, boy," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. That night, the storm returned. The cabin walls creaked as if remembering something old. Michael sat by the stove, the photograph on the table beside his badge. He thought of Davis, his commanding voice during the raid, the assurance that the building was clear, the fire that swallowed everything after. He had followed orders. He always had. Ranger lifted his head, eyes amber in the dim light. The dog's gaze was steady, almost accusing. "You remember him, don't you?" Michael said quietly. Ranger's tail flicked once, then stilled. The silence grew heavy, filled with the ghosts of command rooms, of clipped voices and static-laced reports. Michael could almost hear Daniel laughing somewhere behind it before the world had gone to flame. He leaned back, the chair groaning beneath his weight, and closed his eyes. The scar on his face pulsed with each heartbeat. In the morning, he drove to headquarters. Davis met him in the corridor, pressed uniform, perfect posture, that same faint scent of tobacco and cold air. "You did well to report it," Davis said, his tone even. "We'll take it from here." He smiled without warmth. Michael nodded, watching the man's eyes. They didn't meet his for long. Ranger, waiting outside the glass door, growled low, teeth just visible. Davis stepped back slightly before forcing a laugh. "You should keep that animal under control," he said. Michael said nothing. As the door closed between them, a cold certainty settled in his chest. Ranger was right. Some things never died in the fire, they just hid in the snow, waiting to be found. That evening, Michael stood at the window. The forest beyond the glass was a gray ocean, silent and endless. Ranger lay by the stove, head resting on his paws, still watching the door as if expecting someone. Michael reached down, ran his fingers through the dog's fur, and felt the tremor under the skin, a tension shared. He whispered, "We'll find out the truth." Outside, the last light slipped behind the ridge, leaving only the glow of the fire and the faint hum of the wind. The room smelled of smoke and iron, like the beginning of a confession. The rain had replaced the snow, steady and fine, a gray veil over the pines. The air smelled of wet earth and iron, the kind of scent that carries memory. Michael filled a basin by the stove, the steam rising in thin ribbons. Ranger stood still beside him, fur matted with dirt from the last patrol. The cabin was quiet except for the soft rhythm of water and the slow drip from the roof. Michael worked with patience, hands steady, mind drifting. He spoke little, small sounds of comfort, words that meant nothing and everything. "Easy. Good boy." The dog's eyes followed his every move, amber and patient. Beneath the fur, old scars showed faintly, reminders of another life. Michael had seen that pattern before, though he couldn't yet name where. He rinsed the sponge, the water turning cloudy, brown, then red-brown. His chest tightened. Some wounds simply never washed clean. When the brush caught on something hard near the collar, he frowned. He set the sponge aside, parted the damp fur, and found metal, thin, cold, engraved. A small identification tag, dulled by time and mud. He wiped it gently with his thumb. The letters appeared, one by one, as if surfacing from the deep. Daniel Ranger, K9, Unit 072. For a moment, he could not breathe. The room seemed to contract, every sound drawn away. His friend's name, the same one he'd spoken over a grave of ash and silence. His hand trembled. The tag clinked softly against the basin's edge. He remembered Daniel's laugh, the way he'd toss the ball for his dog and call, "Ranger, come home." Michael had thought both were lost that night. Now one had returned, carrying the name of the other. He sat down heavily on the floorboards, the basin beside him, water cooling, scent of soap and earth thick in the air. Ranger moved closer, pressing his head against Michael's knee. The weight was solid, alive, forgiving. Michael's fingers curled around the tag until the edges bit his skin. Grief and wonder twisted inside him, indistinguishable. He whispered, barely a breath, "You made it back, didn't you?" Ranger blinked once, slow, steady, as if answering. For the first time in years, Michael let the tears fall freely. The sound was small but deep, like thawing ice breaking apart in spring. When the fire burned low, He hung the tag on a nail above the stove. It caught the flicker of light, a quiet star in the dim room. Outside, rain softened to mist. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes half closed, the faint rise and fall of his chest in rhythm with the steady beat of the rain. Michael leaned back, exhaustion mingled with peace. He understood now that some things survived not to haunt, but to heal. In the soft hiss of water against the window, he found the sound of forgiveness, quiet, unannounced, but real. Night in Silver Creek came without stars. The air was sharp, the sky a frozen sheet above the valley. Inside the cabin, the only sound was the soft hum of the recorder. Michael sat at the table, the old tape deck spinning. His face was lit by the faint blue of a monitor. The recording was grainy, but the voices were clear, Davis and two others. Their words were simple, coded, the way men spoke when they had much to hide. "Shipment moves before the thaw," one voice said. "No witnesses this time." Michael's jaw tightened. His hands were steady, but his pulse was not. He let the tape run, the whispers filling the silence like ghosts. Ranger lay near the door, ears twitching at every change in tone. The dog seemed to sense what Michael already knew. Truth was dangerous when it breathed too loudly. Later that night, they went out. The wind carried the smell of oil and iron from the old freight yard. Ranger led, nose low, muscles taut. Snow crunched beneath their boots, the beam of Michael's flashlight carving narrow tunnels of light. Near a half-buried trailer, Ranger froze. He growled once, deep and low. Michael followed the sound, sweeping the light across tire tracks, footprints, then movement. A man stepped from behind the crates, face half covered, pistol drawn. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The man's eyes darted toward the woods, then the trigger began to tighten. Ranger leapt first, black and tan lightning cutting the dark. The shot cracked, echoing off the steel walls. When the smoke cleared, the gun was on the ground, the man pinned, and Ranger's teeth glinted in the cold. Michael knelt beside them, breath coming in clouds. He pulled the weapon away and checked the man's jacket. Inside, a badge. Denver PD. The circle was closing. Back at the cabin, Michael uploaded the audio file to the internal system. The progress bar moved slow, hesitant, then stopped. The screen blinked once, twice, then went black. All data gone. A line of text appeared. Access denied. His heart sank. He knew what that meant. He turned off the monitor and stood still in the dark. Outside, Ranger barked once, a warning. The window shattered a second later, a bullet embedding itself in the wall. Michael dropped behind the desk, drew his weapon. The second shot came closer. Ranger lunged for the door, teeth bared. The attacker burst through the entryway, but the dog was faster. The struggle was short, brutal. When silence returned, the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the room. The intruder lay still. Michael's hand shook as he checked Ranger. No blood, just snow and adrenaline. He sank to his knees beside him, chest heaving, eyes burning. The fire had died, leaving only the faint orange glow of coals. Michael sat on the floor, Ranger pressed against his side. The recorder, dented but still running, caught the quiet rhythm of their breathing. He stared at the bullet hole above the stove and whispered, "They know." Ranger lifted his head, amber eyes calm, unbroken. The world outside was no longer just dangerous. It was hunting them. Michael reached for the tag on the wall, the one engraved with Daniel's name. His fingers closed around it like a vow. "We finish this," he said softly. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow, soundless, relentless. The storm came without warning, snow thick as smoke, the sky churning like an old wound reopening. The mountains vanished behind a wall of white. Michael drove toward the depot, wipers thrashing against ice. The call had come from dispatch, an explosion, multiple alarms, unknown casualties. But he knew. He had felt the shift long before the sirens began. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, ears flat, body rigid. The dog could smell fire before it was born. As they reached the ridge, orange light bled through the snow. The old munitions warehouse burned in silence, flames whipped sideways by the wind. Metal popped beneath the drifts, small detonations buried under layers of time and deceit. Michael pulled the truck off the road, heart pounding with the dull ache of inevitability. "He's covering his tracks," he muttered. The words vanished in the roar of the storm. They moved through the wreckage, wind slicing their faces raw. The air was thick with the tang of fuel and cold iron. Ranger pushed ahead, barking once, then again, sharp, urgent. Michael followed the sound through the haze until a figure emerged at the far end of the lot. Davis. His coat flared in the wind, dark against the fire behind him. 50 years old, every line in his face carved by ambition. "You should have left it alone," he shouted over the storm. Michael raised his weapon, but the ground shuddered, the last cache beneath the ice igniting. The blast threw them apart. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing, snow filling his mouth. Through the smoke he saw Ranger trapped under twisted beams, struggling. The sight tore something open in him. He crawled, dragging his leg, hands bleeding, the world narrowing to breath and will. He reached Ranger, pried the beam free. The dog staggered up, one paw limping, fur singed. Behind them, Davis approached, gun drawn, eyes empty. "You're out of time," he said. His voice was almost kind. Then Ranger moved. The dog lunged forward despite the wound, a flash of muscle and loyalty. The shot went off, the sound sharp, merciless. Ranger stumbled but did not fall, standing between Michael and the gun. Michael fired once. Davis fell back into the snow, the flame swallowing the last of his shadow. For a long moment there was only the sound of wind and Michael's ragged breathing. He caught Ranger before the dog collapsed fully, blood dark against white fur. They began the walk back through the storm. The road had vanished, only instinct and faith remained. Michael carried Ranger in his arms, the dog's head resting against his chest, breath shallow but still there. Each step was a fight, each gust a test of endurance. The world was reduced to weight, heartbeat, and cold. He spoke softly, not to the wind, but to the life he carried. "You're not leaving me. Not this time." The snow answered with silence. Far behind them, the warehouse crumbled, sparks rising like prayers. When the lights of Silver Creek finally appeared, through the storm, Michael's knees gave out. He fell to one side, holding Ranger close. The wind howled around them, but for the first time in years, he was not afraid. He pressed his forehead to the dog's and whispered, "We made it home." The storm eased, the snow falling slower now, as if listening. The storm had passed, leaving a silence so deep it felt sacred. The world outside was white and still, the kind of stillness that follows both mercy and loss. Michael stood by the window of the hospital in Silver Creek, his arm in a sling, ribs bound tight. The dawn light touched the snow, turning it to pale gold. In the next room beyond the glass, Ranger lay beneath a blanket, an IV trailing from his foreleg. Machines hummed softly, steady, alive. Michael's reflection looked older than he remembered, gray at the temples, lines deepened not by years, but by the weight of everything he had carried. The nurses moved quietly around him, respectful of the silence that surrounded soldiers and their ghosts. He hadn't spoken much since that night. There was nothing to add. The fire was out, and so, in a way, was the story that had burned inside him. By noon, the convoy arrived, black SUVs cutting through the snow like ink through milk. The FBI agents stepped out, coats long and clean, faces unreadable. One of them, a woman named Agent Monroe, mid-40s, short dark hair, eyes that had seen too much, approached him with a folder in hand. Her voice was low, unhurried. "We've confirmed the chain. The weapons came from a decommissioned Denver stockpile. Davis moved them under falsified orders." She paused, studying him. "You did the right thing, Officer Grant. Most people would have walked away." Michael shook his head. "No, I walked back." She seemed to understand, closing the folder gently, as if handling something fragile. That afternoon, a press conference was held in the municipal hall. The smell of wet wool and coffee filled the room. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked. Michael sat at the front beside Ranger, now awake, stitches running along his shoulder, but eyes bright, steady. When they called his name, he rose slowly, the room falling quiet. The microphones waited. His uniform was clean, though the fabric still smelled faintly of smoke. He looked at the crowd, faces expectant, curious, distant, then down at the dog sitting at his side. His voice, when it came, was soft but sure. "I didn't save Ranger," he said. "He saved me, from the dark that lived in here." He tapped his chest once. No one spoke. Even the camera shutters paused, as if unsure whether to intrude. The chief of police bowed his head slightly, and someone in the back began to clap, hesitant at first, then joined by others until the sound filled the room. Not applause for victory, but for something gentler. Survival. That night, back at the cabin, the fire burned low and warm. Ranger lay beside him, breathing steady, one paw wrapped in gauze. The air smelled of pine and medicine, clean and alive. Michael poured a small cup of coffee, sat by the window again. The mountains were clear under the stars now, sharp against the dark. He reached for the tag hanging on the wall, Daniel Ranger, K9 Unit 072, and held it between his fingers. "We made it," he murmured. Ranger lifted his head, eyes meeting his in the half-light. Outside, the first hint of dawn began to rise, soft and forgiving. For the first time in years, Michael let himself believe that the past had finally stopped burning. There was only the sound of breathing, his, the dog's, and the quiet rhythm of peace returning home. Morning sunlight spilled over Silver Creek like forgiveness. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of thawing pine and distant rain. The world, for once, felt wide open. Months had passed since the fire. The scars on Michael's hands had faded to pale lines, reminders rather than wounds. He stood in the training field behind the new K9 Center, a modest building of cedar and glass set against the hills. Laughter carried from the yard, young officers and veterans working side by side with dogs, their voices steady, patient. The clang of gates, the sharp whistle of commands, the rush of paws on wet earth. All of it became a kind of music. Ranger trotted beside him, strong again, his fur shining in the morning light. Around his neck hung the old K9 tag, now polished, hanging just below a new silver badge that read, "Honorary Partner." Michael reached down, brushing his hand across the collar, the metal warm from the sun. The ceremony that morning was small, attended by townsfolk, a few officers, and families from neighboring counties. Folding chairs lined the field. A podium stood at the front, draped with the flag. Michael spoke briefly, his voice calm and even. "This place," he said, "isn't just for training dogs, it's for training hearts to trust again." The audience sat in silence, not out of formality, but out of understanding. Among them sat a woman in a wool coat, her son in a wheelchair beside her. The boy, maybe 9, had wide blue eyes and hands that trembled slightly when he reached forward. As the applause faded, Michael nodded toward him. Ranger stepped down from the platform, tail low but wagging. The boy lifted his small hand, uncertain. The dog leaned forward, licking it once, gentle as breath. The crowd went still, then broke into quiet tears and soft laughter. After the ceremony, Michael walked the perimeter of the field alone. The air had turned warm, Spring was beginning to win over the snow. He thought of Daniel, his voice, his laughter, and the years between then and now. Ranger followed close, ears twitching at every sound, the picture of calm. Michael knelt beside him, resting a hand over the old tag. "We did it, partner," he whispered. "We found a way back." Ranger pressed his head into Michael's palm, a soft exhale escaping both of them at once. The sound was small but full, the sound of peace finally earned, not given. As dusk fell, the lights from the training center glowed across the valley. Inside, children's laughter echoed, dogs barked, and somewhere a kettle whistled. Michael stood by the window, watching the first stars rise. Ranger lay by the door, already asleep, chest rising in steady rhythm. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine, and life renewed. Michael smiled faintly, his reflection blending with the night. He whispered to no one, yet to everyone who had ever been lost and found again. "We're all just trying to come home." And for the first time, he felt that they had. In the quiet hours of life, when the house feels too still and the days too long, stories like Michael and Ranger remind us that even the deepest loneliness can be healed by love and faith. Age may slow the body, but the heart still longs to be seen, to be needed, to be loved. If this story touched your spirit, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to keep hope alive for others who need it. May God bless every soul watching. May He grant you comfort, strength, and the gentle reminder that you are never truly alone.